This is my Final Fantasy XVI review, but it's more thoughts on the game as I have gone through it. But man, this game rules. It might be one of the best video games I've played, both from a gameplay and story perspective. I wish the combo system had a little bit more to it when just attacking with Clive, not using your special moves, but that's a minor thing considering it gives you plenty of special moves, 9 of them all accessible at all times during battle, and upwards of 40 skills total with the inclusion of the new icon abilities in the DLC. And the fact that it lets you customize the equip location for any move once it's mastered is incredible and should really be used in more games with systems similar to this one. It's a cool evolution of freelancers in Final Fantasy games, basically at their best. I feel like the enemy variety is a little bit lacking at times. There are lots of the same models or slightly altered models to fit the area, which is fine. It isn't even a problem. It's just mildly annoying and not something that hinders the game in any way beyond just being a little noticeable once you start seeing it. Knowing how the enemy types work keeps you on the offense against them, and something that this game highly encourages. So, in that regard, the semi-repetitive enemy types starts to play to its advantage. Even with defensive icon abilities like an omnidirectional dash to avoid attacks and just an outright block, you are constantly rewarded for being on the attack and keeping pressure on the enemy. There's no reason to hide behind a shield, because the shield you get lets you hit people almost as many times as you want when you use it properly. Avoiding attacks lets you deal more damage and boosts the damage you do with certain equipment that you can get, or freezes enemies in place, and basically every other icon ability is intentionally attack-focused rather than being ones you should use to protect yourself, even if they do let you protect yourself. The design of these skills is top-notch. I absolutely adored the cast. We have such a strong group of characters, and they have such a good dynamic with one another. After finishing the game, I started into New Game Plus a little bit, since they added that in an update a while back. I thought it might have been in there since launch. I'm honestly not sure. And it's really cool seeing how different Clive acts at the beginning and after the time skip. I'm not counting the childhood section for the beginning, because that's as much a tutorial as it is set up for the rest of the game story. And New Game Plus starts immediately after the battle between Titan and Shiva in Dhalmekia. And I'm kind of glad that it skips the first little tutorial section. It was really cool, and it was really awesome setting all of that up, but it was a little bit of a slog, and it would be weird to play through on New Game Plus. I almost wish we got more time with the cast in their youth, though, but I could do without the lengthier tutorial. That said, I thought it was kind of funny when I was getting tutorial pop-ups the entire way through the game, the first time through. New icons meant new mechanics, sometimes side quests caused tutorial prompts, and other various notifications. It wasn't a problem, it was just really funny being 40 hours into this video game and getting a tutorial prompt that says, "Hey buddy, here's how you use this new mechanic that you haven't seen before." I said, "Thanks video game, that's cool." Most of the mechanics are pretty self-explanatory. The only one I think I didn't interact with was the dodge on Mega Flare, and that was just until I realized I had it. I didn't know if I missed it or what. I might have just not seen it on the tutorial when it popped up. But I did not know for so incredibly long that you could dodge while charging that. It felt so obvious considering every other ability, even Titan's, is so oriented towards offense, but I always just sailed around who avoid the enemy attacks while charging my Mega Flare. It was comical realizing I could go directly into enemies with it going, and just build meter so much more easily like that. But maybe it could have explained it better. Maybe I should have read the tutorial prompts. Not really a problem, because it was funny. And it's a cool skill. And the dodge is so cinematic, and it has what feels like a really long dodge window. The amount of offense-oriented moves that felt unique is really cool. I brought up Titans specifically because it is literally a block, but with a perfectly timed counter, it lets you be more offensive, similar to how one of Titan's other skills works. I like that each icon lends itself to a slightly different playstyle, while keeping the aggression and speed the combat overall goes for. It shows the polish put into making it feel satisfying to play, and it makes me wonder what the next Final Fantasy will look like. It'll be hard to follow 16 no matter what the combat feels like, and I worry that an attempt at a grandiose world will overshadow a fun game, but people have probably been saying that for the last 3 decades of Final Fantasy games. I say that, it's probably 4 decades of Final Fantasy games. There are many of these things. Up to this point, I've been pretty spoiler-free, but I think it's time to talk about the ending of the game. Jump right to it. Spoiler warning, on screen. Bam. I'm probably not going to actually put that. Don't worry about it. As for the end of the game, I cannot believe how cool it was when Clive fought Sora and said he was going to fantasy all over the darkness. That was a joke, in case you didn't tab out before having finished the game, and the actual spoilers are coming now. And he did say something about a fantasy when he was fighting Ultima, who said it first. I genuinely yelled a little bit when they said the word Final Fantasy, or that the world Clive fought for was just a fantasy, or something close to that. It was a very funny line, and they absolutely knew what they were doing with it. But man, that ending hurt in a good way. It was such a bittersweet ending, with a little twist in the scene at the very end, following a god knows how long time skip. And I'm also shocked that they killed Clive at the end. I know there are a few exceptions, but I feel like, as a whole, Final Fantasy games don't kill important characters unless they're an antagonist. And I say that, but there's probably at least one important character death in every single Final Fantasy game. But they were big on killing your friends in Final Fantasy 16, and enemies, mostly just your enemies. But it was wartime, and they really made sure you knew that things were bad in this war. I was surprised enough when Cid died. They made a point of showing that possessing an icon took its toll on a dominant, but I didn't think it was going to have consequences for most of the characters. It was refreshing to see that it did, even if it was a little sad. This is especially true when Clive was taken by the Crystal's curse at the end of the game. The game made a point of showing that he was immune to it as the dominant of Ifrit, which made sense once we found out the purpose Ultima had in mind for him. Still, his last lines inside Origin made it seem like the power he took from Ultima was simply going to go away, but that strength being too much for this vessel to bear took on a new meaning when Clive washed up on the shore following the destruction of Origin, stone overtaking his flesh. It is now one of a few games that has made me cry, up there with Xenoblade Chronicles, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and Nier Automata. You'd think I would remember exactly what games. Those are the only 3 I can think of that probably did. There may be more, except for games that made me cry in frustration. I am not counting Two Worlds 2. That's barely a game, that's more of an experience. Shortly before Clive destroys Origin, however, he sobs over Joshua's body once again. That's right, our favorite baby boy also gets murked because the Ultima he absorbed to keep him from Clive is just one of many Ultima's grand schemes, and one of many's Ultimas, which I was a fan of. Clive uses the power of the Phoenix, bolstered by Ultima's magic, to heal Joshua's body after he is severely wounded, but he still doesn't stir. However, in the post-credits, when we see children who are reminiscent of Clive and Joshua playing in their yard, they mention the contents of a book that is, according to the boy's mother, a fairy tale. The book, entitled War of the Icons, is written by one Joshua Rossfield. Due to the book being referred to as fairy tales, but describing the closing events of the game, and likely the events leading up to it as well, it's clear that the scene takes place many generations after the game. They don't even have reference to magic in the current present that scene takes place. They speak of this magic as fairy tale as well. And it would be interesting to know exactly how long it had been since the events of the game took place. But for the purposes of that part of the story, it doesn't matter. Just long enough. To me, this makes the most sense with the information given throughout the game, but especially at the end. I think that Joshua, against all the odds, survives the fall and pins the War of the Icons, or at least the end of it, with Clive as the hero, as the boys in the ending scene reference, Ifrit being basically the champion of the story. Clive would not make himself the most important person in it, nor does he seem the type to want to detail a story about how he killed God. Joshua, on the other hand, idolizes his brother, and does see Clive as the hero that Clive very reluctantly took up the mantle of and very sparingly saw himself as. Now, it is entirely possible that Joshua wrote the story before they went to Origin, and the book was published posthumously. I like to believe that, even if he does not get to see the results of his work, the future Clive strove for came true. There is also the reading of the ending of the game that says that Clive does end up surviving the fall of Origin, and he's the one who finishes off the book with the help of Joshua's attendant, and still leaves the name as Joshua on the book, not changing it, not putting his own on there, so that his brother's name could live on. The events that play out at the end are, I believe, intentionally pretty vague about the fate of our two characters there, even though it pretty distinctly kills Joshua. However, he has survived a pretty distinct killing before, based on the start of the game, so it's entirely possible he is fine once again. If we choose to believe that Clive has died at the end of the game, I think Clive must have been dying from the moment he took Ultima's power, or I guess probably when he destroyed Origin. If magic is gone, then it wouldn't make sense for the crystal's curse to affect Clive, unless him burning away the very origin of magic in his world destroyed him along with it, which would be pretty understandable. It makes me wonder, though, what was going on elsewhere outside of Valisthea. The twin continents of Storm and Ash were in constant war for almost 20 years during the game, probably longer before that, and they had icons and dominants and gods and entire religions that flourished and were lost to time. Meanwhile, Barnabas was said to have come to Ash from beyond the sea. There are other continents out there with no bearing on the dealings with Ultima, and clearly aren't important enough to get an icon, because it is only after he arrives that Barnabas gets Odin. So, what's going on over there? Who knows? Maybe we'll find out at some point. Initially, I thought we could find out in the next DLC, which, as the time of me originally writing this, would be the Rising Tides, where we encounter Leviathan. However, we just learned a little bit more of Storm, kind of north of the Rossfield area, which we didn't learn too much more about other regions in the world outside of Valisthea, which is fine, because what we did get there was really cool. And speaking of the DLC, the Echoes of the Fallen quest was very fun. Omega is so cool, and the Alligans, the Fallen, are crazy. Omega itself has one of my favorite fictional tropes going on, in the form of, that machine is made of meat, and it is gross walking up that tower, and it was so cool. I was hoping we'd get a new iconic power from Omega, something where we could make copies of ourselves, or something along those lines, but the accessories in Omega Weapon Sword are pretty dang good too, and were very nice for finishing up any other side quests. Well, for finishing up fighting Ultima, and going into the next DLC before you get any stronger weapons. I've waited longer than I thought to put this together, meaning the second DLC is now out as of recording this. I played The Rising Tide the night it came out because my previous plans for the day got cancelled, and the story they added and the expansion was incredible. The reveal of Leviathan's dominant was heartbreaking in the best way, and the actual build-up to the fight against Leviathan had an underlying sense of dread the whole way through the ancient ruins overrun with tonberries, which were treated with a lot more seriousness by the characters than I expected. They're never something to not be wary of, but they speak of them with a hushed and fearful reverence almost. It was really nice seeing that, and that the tonberries weren't just reduced to sort of a joke threat. The side quests in this area were also very fun, and I enjoyed completing pretty much all of them. They all revealed a little bit about this part of the world that we wouldn't have been privy to otherwise, and the conclusion of a ceremony to welcome a new baby into the community was an incredibly sweet way to end the DLC. I do, however, feel like the difficulty in the DLC, specifically the Rising Tides, was off. I played through the entire game, Omega DLC included, on the action difficulty. I never went back and finished New Game Plus because the DLC started coming out, and I didn't want to have to finish the game a second time just to go through the DLC, so I waited on New Game Plus. While some parts of the game were hard, it never felt like a problem. It was a challenge to be overcome, and I don't think that this holds true in the Rising Tides. Enemies in level range from around 50, some were like 49, to typically 53, 54 was the highest I saw. And save the generic monsters walking around as you're exploring the field, enemies have an incredibly bloated HP pool that keeps you fighting them for far longer than most encounters in the main game. A mini-boss in this expansion took me probably about the same length of time, or potentially longer, than several of the level 50 endgame hunt marks did, despite me being a higher level with a much stronger weapon. Never mind the two main bosses you face in this area. The Timekeeper boss fight is long, probably the longest, normal, but like on foot as Clive, boss fight of the entire game, save Ultima for obvious reasons, because that's like a 6-stage boss fight. That shit's crazy. It's really cool. It is also mechanically intensive, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The attacks require a lot of attention the first time through to learn which attacks are going to go off and which order. And it was fun to learn the moveset of the enemy here. It felt very much almost like a sort of a Dark Souls boss. It was really cool. But what I didn't enjoy was the one-shot kill he has about 2/3 of the way through the boss fight that then resets his health to about 3/4 full if you die. If you don't dodge one big move he has, it knocks you into the air, dealing considerable damage, which is immediately followed by a rain of blades piercing into Clive wherever he is, usually in the air. Sometimes it felt dodgeable with good timing, sometimes it didn't. The move felt inconsistent at best, and both unfun and unfair at worst. Coupled with the length of the fight, it became a slog to get through. The attack itself was dodgeable at both the point where the initial hit goes off and after the blades come out. However, the timing on the second part was, honestly, I don't know if it was harsher the first or the second hit, because neither of them felt very good. The same can be said for the Leviathan icon fight. The Typhoon midway through the fight was frustrating and felt a bit inconsistent to maneuver around. The phase after it was frustrating to chase Leviathan around as he never stopped moving for more than a few seconds at a time, and the timing on the DPS check is buck wild compared to everything else in the game, Omega DLC included. There's not much I want to say about the roguelike mode they added. It's hard, but that's to be expected, and I kind of wish I had to beat Ultima to get his power set, but the way you get it in there is really cool. and the dialogue Ultima gives you is foreboding, as to be expected by basically everything out of that dude's mouth. I don't want the frustration I felt here to seem like it detracted too much from my overall enjoyment of the game. I didn't feel any worse about the game through the DLC, and both expansions added a lot to enjoy, both to the story and to the gameplay. This game is so damn good, and I think a lot of people want to see more of Valisthea, as well as Clive and friends, and I certainly do too. I really hope that they continue to add to the Final Fantasy XVI world with the sometimes side novels that they publish, or give us little bits of the lore and tidbits of that kind of fun stuff through the art books and all of that. But I do hope they do so in small amounts, because I don't want 16 to end up kind of a bloated mess, because it is such a cool game. It is such a nice experience, and I hope it continues to stay that way as the game exceeds its lifespan, being a solely single-player game with single-player DLC. And you know what? Thank God for that. I'm glad that they didn't try to shoehorn any multiplayer into it. But I think those are pretty much all of my thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI, or at least all of the thoughts I can think of for the time being. Who knows what other thoughts may be rattling around inside this head of mine? Impossible to tell. Nobody knows, not even me.